I left Riot to finish my degree and also be a wedding planner. If you're really lucky, you get to love what you do. But sometimes you're going to want more in your life, and you should feel free to go ahead and do it. You don't need to wait to be paid to do it.
How do you set yourself apart from another candidate?
I actually do think you stand out by doing non-technical things and like things outside of meritocracy.
Does it actually really matter what language you choose?
I think the nice thing about CS students is that you get to modularize your resume. You can put in projects that make sense for the application, and you can take out projects that don't make sense.
Hey everyone, and welcome to 0 to 1. We're here with another episode, and we have a special guest today, Jeff. Jeff is a dynamic professional in the tech industry with a passion for mentorship and career development. With about 4 years of experience in recruiting at companies like Google and Amazon and 5 years in the student space, Jeff has built a career around helping others succeed. As a technical recruiter, he has a keen eye for identifying top talent in software engineering. Beyond his role at Amazon, he runs BobaTalks, a nonprofit program dedicated to connecting students with mentors, resources, and a supportive community to navigate both career as well as personal challenges. Through his work and strong online presence, Jeff has made a meaningful impact in tech. So thank you, Jeff, for joining us today.
Of course, that was such a good intro. Thank you.
Jeff, starting at the beginning, tell us your origin story. Where are you from and what brought you to the US?
So I was born already in San Jose, California. I was born there to a single mother and an older sister. I know that sounds kind of rough for a lot of people, but to be honest, I think I hit the jackpot. I was born into a family with an amazing cousin system. I had a lot of good adventures in my childhood, and I got to live in a lot of different places. I lived in Calgary for about a year, and then I moved to Seattle in 2006. So I've been around, but I think the origin, the biggest part of my origin story is the way that I grew up, the content that I kind of consumed, because I lived through that 2000s era of romantic comedies. That will always be to me my peak of movie content. And the reason I mention all this is because the way that I grew up, the shows that I watched, the movies that I watched, I'm a really it made me a very romantic person. So I look at the world in a very romantic and a very naive kind of way. And not to spoil or anything, but it's a pretty big influence about a lot of who I am and what I decide to do.
We need those people around us in life because things can get too serious and too mentally exhausting, and looking at life through a romantic aspect makes it a lot lighter and more fun, I think. We want to also know a little bit more about what is your career journey like? So where did you study and how did you really come to be a technical recruiter?
I'll answer this too, and for the school answer and then the career answer, because I'm still kind of absolutely bewildered by how the heck everything kind of fell together. I think to kind of just start off is I had the absolute worst time in college. I went to Bellevue College in Washington, and then I transferred to what was my dream school of University of Washington, Seattle. And I was humbled so hard by the Intro to CS series. And I did not do well in college. And it's not to blame the school or anyone, because I know a lot of it kind of was on me. But the psychology of who I was in my college years was absolutely terrible, just because of how far behind I felt, how left behind I felt, how alone I felt. And honestly, I decided that maybe university right there wasn't for me. So I decided that I would leave UW and kind of walk away from my dream school, and honestly just kind of think about how else I can kind of go about my life. After that, I had a very interesting career. I got a contract at Riot Games, which made this really, popular video game called League of Legends. That kind of gave me my corporate experience, my life. And it was great. On paper, as a 20-year-old, League was everything I was doing, but it wasn't everything I wanted to do. That's just not what video games kind of are to me. So I left Riot to finish my degree and also be a wedding planner. I cannot emphasize this enough. I love romantic comedies. And one of the things want to do was be a wedding planner. I just think there's like a charm in just like those speeches. So I wanted to be a wedding planner. So for like that whole year after, I just focused on planning weddings, vendoring, contracts, trying to learn how to do a business by myself with like no experience. And like, it was fun. I think I get to try to like check it off my bucket list. But it was a lot. It was just way too much. It was more of a seasonal thing. And that's kind of how I learned it the hard way. I decided like, okay, maybe it's time to kind of go back to the workforce. So I picked up a very small part-time job selling computers at the mall. The job was at Microsoft. I should probably mention that. I know that it's only was like a set 6-month little time on my resume, but I always am affectionate about this time because every time I work somewhere, I was always been like the younger guy. But when I went back to Microsoft, I was like one of the older people and I got to work with like college students. And for a lot of people, like it kind of hurts their pride. But for me, it kind of reminded me like, oh, shoot. Yeah, I used to be like that, kind of just like trying to work their way through school, feeling lost. And I know it sounds really cringy, but honestly, I felt pretty young again. At that point, I finished my degree. You know, I worked part-time at the mall and I was like, you know what, this is great, but I need something a little bit more. And I got a referral through friends, through networking, through weddings for a contract at Amazon. And it was really awesome. And I did that contract and it was really cool. The contract was like a catalog specialist, but I wanted something a little bit more substantial. So one of my dearest friends referred me to a recruiting coordinator role at AWS. And yeah, now we got it. So we crossed the finish line. Like, good job, underdog Jeff. Like, you made it. You made it into corporate. You made it into big tech. I should have been really proud. I should have been really happy. But like 3 months in, I was just kind of hitting that trend in my life where I got into somewhere I really wanted to be, but it wasn't exactly what I wanted. And you feel a little like jaded from it. And like before, like Riot, wedding planning, Microsoft, like instead of like kind of like quote unquote running away, I was really, really freaking lucky to get a mentor in 2 different people. And I'm not sure, I'm pretty sure they don't want me to name drop them, but one of them was a very sweet older Midwestern lady. She was my L7 and she like watched out for me. And when I crashed out about like being in corporate, she was like, Jeff, like no one's life is like all about corporate. Like you have to have something outside of it. And we had a good heart to heart. She was like twice my age and she gave me and inspired me to work with students. And that's kind of how I got inspired to have like the coffee chat project that eventually spun into BobaTalks. My second mentor, I know I can name drop her. Her name is Jenny. Jenny was more of like my older sister type of mentor. And she was the one who gave me my motivation to do BobaTalks. It was more of like, at the end of the day, you know, like your corporate life is your corporate life. And, you know, if you're really lucky, you get to love what you do. And I've always loved that quote. But sometimes, you know, you're going to want more in your life and you should feel free to go ahead and do it. You don't need to wait to be paid to do it. And if it's something you really want to do, you should absolutely go ahead. So Jenny kicked the shit out of me in a lifetime. And she really inspired me to really double down on the whole BobaTalks thing. 2 years later into this story, I decided to go accept a product or a university recruiter offer at Google. I got to work in product recruiting, which was very new to me. But the most important part about that story was it taught me about how to build product in a go-to-market sense. But more importantly, it gave me more validation and confidence to turn BobaTalks into a nonprofit. I think a very unique thing about me as a recruiter is that I'm also a founder. And when you have a founder recruiter reach out to you to recruit you for product, it leads to some very interesting conversations. And the product recruiting that I did at Google was like at the group and product leader level. So I had some pretty good advice, honestly, be given to me by a lot of different people, from startups, from nonprofits, from big tech, from like startup or like smaller spaces. And I got a lot of really good advice. But the one thing they all kind of inspired me to do was do nonprofit. Got laid off, unfortunately, but it gave me an opportunity to do something really unique in my life. Because at that point, for like 2 years, BobaTalks was always like my moonlight project. I've never like really doubled down on it, you know? So for the 1 year of me being laid off, I really put everything I had to see how far I can kind of push it. And it blew up. And holy crap, it freaking blew up. After a year, I decided that I wanted to go back to corporate. And now I'm currently a university recruiter at Amazon, where I get to work with interns and new grads, specifically in the tech space, in the software engineering space.
Mm-hmm. That is obviously super impressive. And I'm very curious, how do you manage your time and energy between like recruiting and running BobaTalks? And do you have any like self-care habits or productivity hacks that keep you grounded?
Yeah, so I kind of was taught how to build product through kind of like the trial and fire methodology. Just go at it as much as you can. Then when things start to feel a little bit tough, pause, reflect on things that are working for you, things that aren't working for you, and kind of refine it as you go. So that process for me was trying to balance both my corporate life and what was basically my passion project. And I learned pretty quickly that it was really hard to balance. So someone kind of taught me about this, like the houseplant productivity hack, that if you have something that you relatively care about, just put an hour a week into it. And then slowly over time, it compounds, and the better you get at like your time management and workload, the more time you can put into your passion project. And then the weeks in your life where things are a little bit more stressful, then at least you can know like your project can survive off just 1 hour productivity. The most important like productivity hack I really have is that if something is really important to you, the most important thing isn't about like how much effort and work you put into it. The most important thing is how consistent you can stay with it. I think I'm pretty much living proof that if you just put in an hour into a passion project, but you're consistent with it, over a long period of time, it kind of compounds. But truth be told, like I'm like a lot of other people, like I didn't know how to balance everything. And at first it kind of just sucked. But once I kind of realized that this was something I really wanted to do, I kind of realized I could do it slowly and I would still be pretty happy.
Compounding is such an interesting concept, in my opinion. There is a question I also get a lot on LinkedIn, and I'm pretty sure you get spammed with it. He asked us, what are your top 3 tips for breaking into a sphere role at the FANG or other big tech? And what advice do you have for software engineers to stand out in today's competitive job market?
Honestly, for me, I kind of think a lot of like the bigger tech recruiting has a lot of very similar trends. It's important to apply early. It's important to secure network referrals the quarter before. And most importantly, it's really, really important to understand that a lot of the recruiting processes are going to be relatively similar. You're going to apply, you might get a technical screen in the form of an online assessment. You're going to be invited to a round. The round is probably going to be focused a lot on like data structures. It's going to focus a lot on rationality. It's going to focus a lot about your ability to solve problems. But more important than any of that for CS students, it's going to focus a little bit about how you communicate your thought process. I think what I tell most students is like, don't be too overwhelmed by each specific company in itself. It's kind of easier to think of everything as kind of like a collective and recruit from that perspective, that everyone is looking for just, I guess from a SWE perspective, most employers are just looking for students who kind of come from a strong background, have a little bit of experience, come with as much technologies and frameworks as possible, but most importantly, are able to understand and communicate like a logical thought process in solving problems. As far as like quirky tips, I kind of really honestly help them set them apart. For me, I think a majority of SWE internships are pretty much back-end focused. I would say that big tech in particular is a little bit focused a little bit more on the Java side. And maybe I can kind of argue a little bit more on the C++ side, a little bit. I think projects should kind of honestly lean towards the tech stack of the company that you're applying to. And if I'm like, saying right now that a majority of the internships out there are probably going to be back-end focused, and a majority of the bigger tech companies, because they're a lot older, their back-end tech is going to be either like Java or another object-oriented programming language. Yeah, you should probably focus on projects with that. It will probably help you stand out a little bit more. But for the most part, I also don't tend to be pretty vocal about that, because I think the most important thing is just CS students being able to pursue different technologies and working on projects with different tech stacks so they can learn about what they like and what they don't like. I think the nice thing about CS students is that you get to modularize your resume. You can put in projects that make sense for the application. You can put in, and you can take out projects that don't make sense. And if you're applying to a a company that's historically very one specific tech stack focused, then yeah, your project should kind of be evidence towards that. But there's a lot of nuances here, right? Just like how C++ is immersed in Java, how you never know what specific tech stack a company has, how your application could go to a specific team, or if you maybe you're a little bit jaded with the recruiting process and you want just like one master resume for everything. There's a lot of nuanced takes here. But yeah, that's kind of like my thought process.
Does the programming language you choose for the online assessment or for the live coding interview, does it matter? Does it actually really matter what language you choose?
Not for the actual like activities. No, I think students should be encouraged to program in a language that they're comfortable with. When they interview, if a team is looking for something specific, I think the recruiters have the responsibility of disclosing that. But for the majority of student recruiting, I would say the general spirit is interview in the language that you're comfortable with. If the team needs something, they'll let you know.
So comfort over like anything specific. Got it.
Yeah. I think I've ran into a bunch of like unique cases where a lot of students are like, can you tell me a little bit more about the projects, the tech stack, so I can code in the quote unquote their language. And I usually am like, coding logic is going to be relatively agnostic. So if you're good in C++ and you just don't happen to know Java right now, and you do pretty well in the interview, I'm pretty sure you can use the time between now and like fall to pick up Java and you should be relatively fine. So for me, it's less about like the specific language. And honestly, I just care more about like kind of like the rationality about kind of everything, really.
There's a lot of ways in which people can do specific things, but do you have advice you would give to software engineers to stand out in today's highly competitive job market? How do you set yourself apart from another candidate?
The way that recruiters think is kind of like, how can this candidate best kind of fit and match and align to my role? And if you're applying to a very specific role, then the best way to stand out is to kind of present as much like resume data that kind of is present on your resume, in the sense like a typical average recruiter can look at it and make the easy association like, oh, I'm looking for a new grad that's going to be more focused on backend. And then I pick up a resume, and then all the data on the resume obviously indicates like this person primarily programs in the backend, and it should be pretty one-to-one like that. I have almost always found it the most useful that if you're securing a referral, you should have someone advocate for you. If you are someone who are kind of is interviewing a little bit early, you've done your networking, all of those things can be kind of activated prior to like the hiring cycle, and you kind of stand out in the sense of like you were there kind of first. And I think that's pretty cool. I also have a very controversial, counterintuitive tip. I feel like a lot of people kind of don't agree with, but I actually do think you stand out by doing non-technical things and like things outside of meritocracy. I think doing things like conferences, events, hackathons, socials, like I honestly think over a long period of time, those things honestly do kind of add up. You meet the right people, and the idea is the more people you connect with, by that logic, more opportunities should technically come your way. The person who always like puts themselves out there usually stands to receive more opportunities than the person who doesn't really go looking for them. So I know that's a pretty controversial statement, but I think in this era of technical recruiting, every student should kind of feel comfortable with exploring as many different avenues of recruiting as possible.
I kind of agree with you, because I feel like that goes hand in hand with like hard skills and soft skills. Like you could know every programming language, but not know how to be a leader or not know how to be a team player. And like putting yourself out there with like workshops and conferences and hackathons really encourages you to develop those soft skills.
I was wondering if there are any common mistakes you see candidates make during the hiring process that they should avoid.
I think there are some common mistakes that a lot of students don't know about corporate. I think a lot of students think that, internships are infinite, or that the timeline for internships is relatively long because it's like relatively like 4 months. And that's a lot of, objectively speaking, that's 1/3 of a year. That's a lot of time. But in actuality, recruiting timelines are pretty short. Probably the only feasible way that recruiting can be done in a high volume type of methodology is relatively a first come, first serve basis. So students who are kind of like, I need to prioritize these things first and then put recruiting on the back burner, students who kind of like delay recruiting because they need to work on refining their projects, when in the most respectful way, this might have been probably better done the quarter before. people who put off applications because they think it's stronger to apply for a referral right now, which is super controversial, right? But I think the biggest quote unquote mistake that I see students typically do are the ones who are a little bit more on the complacent side when it's actually recruiting season. I will go on record saying that I think the most important factor to recruiting is timing. I think the second most important thing is probably luck. And then third is probably your candidacy and meritocracy. I think timing matters more than anything else. I think the ones that typically don't make the best use of their time are the ones who suffer a lot from recruiting.
So you definitely think that applying early gives you an advantage in the process?
I think any methodology that allows you to recruit early is probably the best methodology out there. That's why I think conferences are really cool. That's why I think properly done referrals are pretty good too. When you get to recruit earlier in the season, you have more wiggle room and things don't feel as much like from the student perspective, you have more wiggle room and you don't have that much pressure. But you guys should probably know like recruiting's insane and anything can happen anytime. And there's going to be situations where you're looking for a May offer and it's April and you have nothing lined up. And you're going to wish you could go back in time and kind of give yourself the extra week or two to recruit.
Layoffs have been like a major concern in the tech industry. And I was wondering, for those impacted, what advice do you have?
I think if you were impacted by a layoff, before I give advice, I'm just going to like kind of go with a statement. It's that no one expects to see a layoff happen and it sucks. And I spent, I think, equivalent of what was like 2 weeks of hours kind of just balled up and not knowing what to do. Like my first piece of advice is just process it, because no matter what anyone says for action items or like kind of like our bounce back planner or whatever have you, none of that matters if your mind is not in the right place. I think just taking a day or 2 or 3 or a week, whatever, to process it is probably the most important step. Step 2 is probably kind of figure out a work back plan or just like a short-term plan, whether if you got severance, you're filing for whatever that is, and then just like see how much savings that you have. Like that's a pretty logical step too. As far as step 3 goes, I think currently in today's job market, I don't think students should feel as much dread versus like their older counterparts, because a lot of the layoffs that are happening, honestly, it feels like it's kind of impacting those who kind of like are kind of in that employed bubble. I feel like it doesn't affect too much when it comes to the new grad or internship bubble, because the way that I think about the world, I think of internships and new grad as kind of like an investment into a company's talent. The best companies in the world are the companies that have internship programs. And this is not even like an opinion. I'm pretty sure the last time I did a TED Talk, I brought up the fact like the best companies in the world leading right now, all like I think 98% of them all have internship programs, because I think all the companies know philosophy wise, like investing in new talent is the one thing you should always do in order to make sure that your company grows properly. And I think in that sense, I think most students should feel a sense of relief. I think there's a school of thought that will the world ever go back to that golden bubble of tech where it was candidate favored, there were like companies were hiring like by the dozen, easy mode and all that good stuff. Personally, I don't think it would ever go back to that point, but it doesn't mean like the world isn't healing. And I think that's the most important thing. If you are on the older side of this conversation and listening to this podcast, I would say that it's okay that you got hit by whatever hit you. And I know how much it sucks. The best advice I can possibly give moving forward is be pretty open-minded with the opportunities that come. Trust me when I say this, when I got laid off by Google, a lot of places didn't seem as pretty or as attractive as then. And honestly, that was a pretty immature thought, considering like how lucky I had it kind of being able to kind of live off the savings that I had. But if I could go back in time, I'd be a lot more open-minded about the opportunities that were out there. And that there is a world outside of tech and mainstream tech. And that a lot of good sectors in the world would honestly benefit from a lot of the talent that romanticizes the shit out of the tech industry. So please keep an open mind, because a lot of the world needs people who have the skills.
Of course, it can take a toll on mental health. You've spoken a lot about mental health on the platforms that you have, as well as your TED Talk that you recently gave. So what advice would you have to those struggling to take that first step?
Your first step is always going to be the hardest, right? Because there is a huge difference between 0 to 1. Ha, no pun intended. There's a huge difference between 0 to 1 and like 1 to 5 and 5 to 10 and then 10 to 100. The 0 to 1 is the absolute toughest step because there's a risk to it. There's a sense of vulnerability. Obviously, there's connotations to mental health. And honestly, you might just might not be ready to take that step, and that's totally okay. The way that I talk about mental health with my students is like sometimes it's not about like what you're doing. It's honestly a little bit more that you're doing it. I think the students that try, at least the students that put themselves out there, the students that are consistent, they're usually the ones who get to see like the fruits of their labor. And I always encourage the mindset that like if you are someone who has like career goals, someone who has a dream company, someone who is pretty fixated on like an end game somewhere that's relatively tangible, then it's an end game, it's an end goal. And as long as you work hard and as long as your career is somewhat relatively well designed and well planned, it's probably inevitable that you're going to scale and get enough experience to go into that space. And yeah, sure, maybe it might not be in your 20s or it might not be in the ideal age that you want it to be, but that's kind of what an end game and an end goal is. It's just something you kind of work towards. And I think a lot of the implications to mental health right now in the most respectful way possible is that a lot of students feel like they're behind when they look at their counterparts. They feel stuck because they're not growing as fast as their friends. They feel not as good when they're not going through OAs or going through interviews, but you know, their people are, and it sucks. But that's kind of how an end game kind of works, is that if you have an end game goal, then of course 0 to 1 is going to suck and it's going to be hard for you to kind of go through. But that's the whole point, is that you stay consistent in that process, you stay consistent in your efforts, and eventually in the grand scheme of things, like you'll get towards your goal. But everything, I've always grown up with this, like, again, romantic, there's a whole theme around this conversation. Everything connects with each other. I've always grown up with this quote, and I learned it from Scrubs. It was like, nothing worth having in this life will ever come easy to you. And I think that if there's an end game is something that you truly want, then it's going to be a little bit hard. But that's the whole point of 0 to 1.
We usually ask this question at the end. It's like the last standard question we ask to all of our guests. What's the most valuable lesson you've learned and how has it shaped your path?
A lot of people actually ask me how BobaTalks started, and I usually give them the same speech. Like it started with like a coffee chat project. It started because I crashed out. But what people don't know is that BobaTalks at the very first 3 months was very career focused, and it had nothing to do with mental health or personal stuff. It wasn't until I met a student, and I'll name drop her because she's great. Her name was Sophia Lee. She was a UC Berkeley student. It wasn't until I met her and I had what was now I consider like my very first real Boba Talk, that it was beyond the career stuff. The career stuff is like what the stuff is like what students usually stress about and worry about, but there's always going to be like personal nuances and motivations about like why that stuff stresses you out. And I won't go into detail about like what Sophia and I talked about, but the lesson that I learned from Sophia's Boba Talk was that when a student or a 20-year-old something is just stressed about life, everything is kind of connected to each other. It's like a domino effect and everything is lined up with each other. And you can't solve one area of your life without bringing up two things about another area of your life, and it sucks. And the lesson that I learned from this talk was that if you really want to help students and you really want to help 20-year-olds out in life, you have to be kind of prepared to have conversations that kind of like range from anything, whether it's about mental health or relationships, career or identity, family and friends. If you are someone who really wants to like really be able to help your partner, your close friends, someone, you know, your family, you kind of have to go the whole mile. And I realized after that talk that I didn't want to make just the impacts on the world when it came to career and stuff. Like I didn't want to just help 20-year-olds find internships in new grad. I wanted to help 20-year-olds kind of figure out life. And that was like the one lesson. And I'm really grateful I'm always going to be grateful for that BobaTalk because like it really inspired me to do a little bit what I want to do with a lot more purpose.
I was looking at the website for BobaTalks, but it looks like you guys like have a big team now that's working.
I am really, really, really privileged to have people who share the same dream that I do, that we just want to help people and help kids and help students kind of figure out their lives. And a lot of the people that are helping me and the people that I get to partner with every day, they're just everyday normal people who kind of at some point in their lives had no idea what they were doing, but we all know that this is what we want to do. Like we want to help people. And is it a big team? Yeah. And I don't know what I'm doing. And I'm probably not the best leader in the world about this because I've always learned like managing teams and persons is definitely not up my alley. But they are some of the best people I get to work with. And I'm really, really proud of them. A lot of them are students. A lot of them are kind of volunteering for, resume experience and trying to learn. But a lot of the others are really just here to help as many as they can. And I value both equally.
I think that's also why Ryan and I were like thinking of starting this podcast in the field, not even professionals, people going through their struggles, people going through like, the highs and lows of life. And we were like, how do we bring this for free to like the audience? So that's also kind of like one of the motivations behind why we started this podcast. We're very, very grateful that you were able to come on and like share your insights. I'm sure everyone is going to be super excited. Connect with Jeff on LinkedIn, follow him, connect with him to understand more about ongoing careers. If you want to talk about mental health, if you want to get some like tech insights, if you're a student or an aspiring mentor, also, of course, check out BobaTalks. They have a Discord server. And this is an opportunity for you guys to join a supportive community and experience a blend of tech and also Asian culture. Anything else you want to add, Jeff?
Thank you so much for inviting me to the podcast. I really do appreciate it. I am humbled always to even be considered for stuff like this. To anyone who's listening to this, if it's for my nonprofit, I want you guys to know like you can just come as you are. It doesn't matter to me if you're a tech or a non-tech, if you're going to an Ivy League or you're at a community college, you're in Canada or America, your English is your first language or second. I've always imagined BobaTalks being like the Hufflepuff of the world, that it should be a safe space for like anyone who's just struggling. And that's like the one thing we have in common. Like my community is probably like 14,000 people strong right now.
Wow.
And the one thing we have all in common is that we all have no idea what the hell we're doing. But we're all figuring it out, and it's a pretty good representation of anyone who just wants a safe space to be a part of. That if you have no idea what you're doing, then yeah, BobaTalks is definitely for you. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.